You'll laugh, you'll learn, you'll impress your group chat. That's all we all aspire to. And now, without any further delay, the critics at large from The New Yorker.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chris.
Hello, and welcome to a live taping of Critics at Large, a podcast from The New Yorker. Yeah, I feel that way about it too. I'm Vinson Cunningham.
I'm Alex Schwartz.
And I'm Naomi Fry. Each week on this show, we make sense of what's happening in the culture right now and how we got here. We are coming to you today from the studios at One World Trade. And audience, let's have a round of applause for our listeners. So over the past few weeks, Alex and Vincent and I have been trying to wrap our heads around what this year has been about.
It's no easy task. Last year, when we reached this point, we were looking around thinking, what have some big things been? And we started to notice that everywhere we looked, there were dolls. Not just Barbie. There were all these stories. I'm thinking of Poor Things also, about women who had come out of these cloistered environments and started to interact with the broader world and come into their political selves. So we declared 2023 to be the year of the doll.
I should note that this was actually Alex's brilliant idea.
Well, I'm happy to share it with my co-hosts.
Anyway.
As ever.
So this year we were like, okay, it's not the year of the doll anymore. What is this year about? And one thing that struck us is the sheer number of flops we saw this year.
Yeah, it was a lot of dashed hopes, a lot of unmet expectations, big promised items in culture, in the arts. Let's face it, we're going to talk about it also in politics that were built up in one way and kind of in one way or another failed to deliver. Weirdly, though, in kind of fruitful and illuminating ways to think about.
And so today we're going to talk about the most phenomenal flops of the year. The people and projects that seemed too big to fail, and yet they failed.
It's going to be a cheerful day at Condé Nast.
It's going to be cheerful.
It's going to be real fun.
Yes.
We're going to be talking about flops, yes, but not just about flops, but what these flops tell us about audiences today, about fandom, and about the surprising upsides, perhaps, of an enormous flop. When something fails so badly, what new space opens up in its wake? And so that's today on Critics at Large, the year of the flop. Let's have a round of applause for the flop. Okay, you guys, the flop. Maybe we should start by defining our terms. What makes a flop? What is this flop that we speak of?
I mean, a flop has to have expectations going into the flop.
Right.
Like, if something is quietly failing and it's never really getting off the ground and you know, like, I'm just going to put out a random example that strikes me as a flop from this year in the world of culture, Naomi, because I know it's a favorite of yours.
Oh.
In the show industry, there is a huge IPO at the start of season 3 of Industry, and there's much brouhaha around this IPO, and it is an absolute flop. And if they hadn't made the T-shirts and they hadn't taken this thing to market, you know, it would have just fizzled. Like, the flop is different than a fizzle, I think is what I want to say.
It's true. I think, that's actually a great example. Lumi Industries,
Yeah,
the
Lumi.
green energy enterprise.
R.I.P. Lumi.
That starts off the latest season of HBO's Industry is a flop because I think, Alex, what you're saying is that there needs to be a kind of bigness involved.
A flop is, I don't know, a certain local baseball team and stripes and nice haircuts. The home of Babe Ruth and Joe DiMaggio.
What might you be talking about?
Maybe it's the New York Yankees, and maybe they go to the World Series, making some of us very happy and hopeful, and barely being able to win a single game. And this happens, by the way, did you know they televised this stuff? On national TV. That embarrassment is also part of the nature of the flop. The public, the big public spectacle
the public
of it.
spectacle, yeah. And, you know, just even the term the World Series. Like, what could be more embarrassing than,
It's not
failing.
the world instance. It's a
right.
whole series of it.
It's like it's a series of failures on the world stage.
Yes. I mean, the phrase "look alive" out there really came to me as I was watching the Yankees flail. It's like if you don't win, it's one thing, but they flopped.
They flopped.
They flopped.
Yeah.
They flopped.
Yeah.
And so I think we're going to start now, you guys. We're going to each bring an example of our, I don't know, favorite flop of the year is the right term, but a
choice flop?
A choice flop, a particular flop that comes to mind when you think 2024. Alex, do you want to start us off?
Should I flop first?
Just flop first.
Okay.
Go for it.
Well, so the thing I just want to say is a little asterisk to Year of the Flop. If we are at the end of this, we just have had Glicked, which is this huge success. So when I got nervous about this topic, I started to think, is it really the Year of the Flop if it ends on this high note? And then I thought back, just very briefly back, to the elephant in the room, the election. I do think that the election for the Democrats was an enormous flop because, you had this, first of all, spectacle around the question of will Joe Biden resign or not resign. There was this big, it was a plot line. How insane is that we were living inside of a political plot line, the kind of thing that you actually might see on a TV show. And suddenly, a hero comes along. Like, it was just like, oh man, can this be turned around?
Did she have the strength to carry on?
I do think that one thing that happened outside of the politics, or maybe commensurate with the politics, and I want to know what you guys think about this, with the election, was this creation of a protagonist. It was not just a creation of a political figure. Kamala's vagueness was noted quite a bit. The fact that people wanted more policy answers, wanted more of a sense of where you're going to actually break. And so a lot of it really did become positioning this kind of, Kamala as the Trump destroyer, this new protagonist to come into the story. And that, to me, is what the flop is about. The flop was that tale. That tale did not make it through. There's one final thing I want to say about this flop, which is I do think that Kamala Harris flopped with grace, and I'm not sure I'm into that.
Okay. Interesting.
She did have a weird video after the election.
Well, her concession speech was she maintained her, kind of we got it demeanor, and she definitely maintained her composure. And sometimes when you see a flop, sometimes you want to see the floppiness of it. I don't mean to keep coming back to the F word, but I do think it's important to acknowledge that not everything is okay, and on we go.
Hunky-dory.
Yeah. And that is what I hope that the Democratic Party takes away, the pain of the flop.
Yeah.
Okay.
Feel the pain of the flop
sting.
is what I'm going to encourage. Yeah.
Feel the rain on your skin.
Yeah. and also that.
Yes.
That I do
Always.
wish for everyone.
Always.
Yes.
Vincent, how about what's your flop of the year?
Many personal ones, but I'll talk about somebody else's. Mine is a little lighter. It is the case, and maybe as we talk about this, we're going to kind of taxonomize different kinds of flops. This is one that you could have seen miles away, decades in fact away. This is Francis Ford Coppola and the movie Megalopolis. Did anyone experience this spectacle? Did anybody see it?
Yeah.
Michael Schulman in the front
Can
row.
you applaud if you saw the film? Let's just
make
make that visual. All right. David Remnick saw Megalopolis. I'm going to let the world know.
Yeah.
We have David Remnick
yes,
in the house.
Film in this formation being very loose as a term. But this is the slow motion flop where in the late 70s, Coppola gets the idea. I want to make a movie about a little happening called The Fall of the Roman Republic. And but Coppola style though, and so but it goes into sort of a long painful case of what we call development hell. You can't get it made partially because of the sort of tenuous results of some other films, and then 9/11 makes it more difficult to make this movie. Eventually Coppola steals from the piggy bank of those beautiful vineyards, all that Coppola wine money, to the tune of $120 million. Can you believe it? To make a movie that stars Adam Driver as I still don't fucking know what he was. And kind of an artist, architect, designer. He's making people's dresses. He's also stopping time with his mind.
Was he not a dreamer, Vincent?
He was a dreamer, but he was also a
Was he a doer also?
He was a doer. He's like part Ayn Rand, part Elon Musk. But he lives in a futuristic New York that he wants to move forward. And he has this idea for a city.
Literally?
He wants to, he does want to.
He stops time with his mind, so who knows what's possible.
There's a lot of spatial moving forward in this movie, but also, ideological moving forward as well.
Right.
But he's being stopped by the sort of conservative force of the mayor of the town that is clearly New York. There is
and it's Eric Adams.
It's Madison Square Garden. It's Eric Adams, played by Giancarlo Esposito. He's not really Eric Adams.
Okay.
But he might as well be, He's corrupt and nobody likes him, It's like the most realistic thing in the movie. But is it a movie? I don't know. All that I know is that it's big, it's public, you could see it coming from a mile away, and crucially, let's add another sort of definition to the pot. It sparks a round of Schadenfreude like you have not. Part of the flop is the people. There are people waiting in the wings for you to flops. I don't know if you've heard of them. They're called your haters.
Right.
And they tend to come out when the flop is confirmed.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So you're saying if a flop flops in a forest and no one is there to hear the flop, it's not a flop.
It's not. It's got to make a loud crash, and there's got to be jackdaws in the branches being like, "I told you so."
Mm-hmm. Right. Mm-hmm.
Or do jackdaws sound like that? I don't know.
Right.
Did either of you see this?
No, it sounds like a nightmare, I have to say.
It looks like a nightmare and feels like a nightmare.
From your description of it.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing. What it is, though, this movie is it's truly ambitious. There's 5 different filming styles employed at once. There are songs. There are pyrotech. So much of that money went to CGI that had no purpose. They're just and then a ball of light appears before Adam Driver, and then it evanesces, and then it's no one's ever going to talk about that again.
Right.
But
and there's no reason.
That's right. But ambition is part of the anatomy of the flop too.
Sure.
The more you say this is the biggest thing ever, this is my masterwork. The more you act like Kanye West, basically. Yeah. The more the bigger the bigger and truer, right?
Yeah. Yeah. The action is the juice, as they say.
That's right.
Never mind. But I do think there's also the fact that Francis Ford Coppola is a very old man at this point, right?
Yes.
And this was his long-standing dream, as you said, to bring this vision to fruition. So there's something about the kind of the figure of the old man who's been thinking and hoping and dreaming and planning, and then it flops. Yeah. Which is there's a hint of tragedy there.
Yeah, I'm sympathetic to this flop. I'm totally sympathetic to this flop.
Me too.
For those reasons.
There is something sympathetic about it.
It's the big swing flop, and it's the big dream flop. And, you have to sometimes you have to dare to go big and to do what it is you think needs doing. Does it sound to my ear like a wildly overindulgent, maniac's delight? Yeah, might it come in 20 years or 30 years to be regarded as an absolute cult classic, and people look back at our era and say, you pathetic blind judgers, how did you miss this? I can't even believe it. Look at the limitations of 2024 that could even have allowed something like this to be passed up. Yeah. It could totally be. I mean, this is a flop that just seems its destiny seems to be reconsideration.
I mean, there's also something, Alex, to your point about how it seems like what you're saying is that this movie is proudly out of step, in the sense that this was his dream and it didn't matter to him what culture would think about it, right? Or if culture is aligned with it or not. So that's one type of flop. And then there's the other type of flop where clearly the person is very much concerned with what culture will think and how to be in step with culture, but manages not to be. And yes, my friends, I'm talking about Katy Perry. Which is my flop of the year. I mean, God bless, but it's, so Katy Perry, a very, 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 very multi-platinum selling, successful artist of the aughts, came out in 2010 with Teenage Dream, incredibly successful, then had, Prism, had like many extremely successful singles, was kind of totally in tune with the culture as this kind of like irreverent, provocative pop star who, was kind of like fun and cute and sexy and had like huge bangers. Yeah. And then came kind of the years where that ceased to be the case, right? Which is kind of like the latter end of the aughts. She released a couple of albums that were much more sincere than her earlier efforts, and she seemed to kind of flail. And then this summer, she released the first single from her, eventual album that came out in September, Women's World. Okay, so many of you have probably seen the video and heard the song. It was this sort of like tongue-in-cheek question mark, yes or no, anthem to a female empowerment where, she was basically like, it's a woman's world and you're lucky to be living in it. Like women can be strong, but they can also be sexy. It was a kind of weirdly out of step girl boss anthem. And everybody was baffled. And, literally everyone. I mean, Pitchfork was like, this is the worst thing we've ever heard in our lives. Like, I forget what the headline was, but it was something along those lines. And people were just like, speaking of Schadenfreude, like people were just like, oh my God, Katy Perry, what is she doing? She has no idea what year it is. Like, then, in reaction to that, Katy Perry herself was like, LOL, guys, it's satire. But was it? It kind of like came in too late. And, meanwhile, there was like Charlie XCX with her very successful and cool, Brat album. And Kamala was Brat and all of that. At that moment, Katy Perry, who then released album 143 in September, was very much flopping. It was like a very public misapprehension of the conditions of culture as we know them right now.
It was a try-hard's flop.
Yeah.
I think the very public misapprehension is it, because it's the exact counterexample to the Francis Ford Coppola example. You have one person saying, I simply do not care where the culture is. I will make my statement.
Yeah.
And you have someone else just being like, is
exactly.
it here? Is it here? Just like, where's the wind? Like, gotta catch it. And I, agree.
Alex is raising her index finger in the air, like searching
my
for
licked
wind.
index finger, yes.
To the wind.
Just trying to feel it.
Classic gesture.
Yes. I think that is an embarrassing flop, and it's also a super satisfying flop. And I think that's where all the Schadenfreude came in, because, Vincent, you made me think before, like, who is the flop about? Is it about the flopper? No. It's about the observers of the flopper.
Right, yes.
Like,
yes.
How are we all reacting? We are the jackdaws.
What accounts for this, though? Just like as a historian, as a lover of the game, Naomi, I would love to
for like, love of the game.
I mean, that's why we do it.
Oh yeah.
Like I remember, for example, I don't know if anybody remembers this, or if it's like, I don't think it's just imagined by me. There was a year where everybody just kind of decided they didn't like Anne Hathaway.
Yes.
Do you remember that? It was like, she tries too hard, she's probably mean.
And it was like the theater kid thing.
It was after she won for Les Mis.
Yeah. It's like 2 years ago, like maybe 4 years ago, and everybody was like, is Taylor Swift a fascist? Like, just like, people just like decide
she's
things
a Nazi.
about people. Yeah. Just these weird things. Is this that? Is she losing a popularity contest, or did something actually happen to the quality of her? Why is she feeling like a plastic bag right now? Why? What is the reason?
I think it's definitely a popularity contest. I think, I had during the summer, we had sort of special one-on-one episodes, and mine was with Kala Fasane, our staff writer at The New Yorker, who writes a lot about pop music. And he, we were talking about kind of the pop girlies of summer, and he said, I think correctly, pop music is absolutely a popularity contest. It's like, it's working or it's not working, and there's there's peaks and valleys in every performer's career, and sometimes there's that moment where a girl just gets to be the girl with the most cake, gets to be the most popular. And there are moments when she's not going to be the most popular, and it's going to be very embarrassing because everything is very public. And I think that's what happened to Katy Perry. And we don't know what's going to happen in the future. Maybe she'll, completely reinvent herself, and the conditions of culture, who the hell knows what they'll be at that point. Even in literally 3 months, because everything moves so fast, nowadays. Maybe they'll be congenial to whatever, kind of new version of her she'll trot out. So we've been talking about these 3 mega flops of the year. Is the flop, do you think, a new thing? Is this something that has always kind of been with us, or have modern hype cycles kind of urged in a new age of the flop? What are your thoughts about that?
I think that the flop was always with us and will always be with us. But you mentioned these kind of solo episodes that we did over the summer, which were really fun. If you haven't heard them, you should check those out. If I do say so myself. I spoke with our esteemed, brilliant colleague, Jen Wilson, who I just always love to hear from about what she's thinking about in the culture. And she was kind of talking about this sort of increasingly algorithmic and therefore almost the way that our realities take on the texture of gambling. Anything from sports gambling, or just the way that algorithms function is to predict. There's always this gap between reality and prediction that we feel, and we all become kind of these people who are, placing bets, doing these weird parlays of the soul, not just with our money, but with our attention and our appreciation of art. It seems to me that the more our society feels that way, feels that quantification comes into things, I think the drasticness of the drop gets bigger. For example, one thing that happened this year that I was really interested in, and so were many people, was the beef between Kendrick Lamar and Drake. And the way that this has been a trend over the past maybe 25 years, since the 2000s, that the way that one of the ways in which hip hop is enjoyed is by it's a weird thing where fans never used to do this, at least in my memory, but all of a sudden battle each other by being well, my artist sold this many. And that the numbers, instead of the sort of ineffable thing of enjoyment, becomes part of what it means to be a fan of something. And so Drake is literally suing the record company that employs both him and Kendrick Lamar because they juiced the numbers of the beef ending song "Not Like Us," right? So I do think that the more we all have this feeling of the expectations are so sharply delineated, I think the flop becomes even just much more visible or something like that.
Right. I mean, I think the numbers game is really interesting. It used to be that, and it still is in some circles to an extent, that taste was something that mattered more than the numbers, But flops, it's a numbers game, right? I mean, it's literally we talked about bigness, we talked about publicness. It has to do with popularity. It has to do with the numbers. And so it makes sense that flops have become more kind of the currency of the discussion.
There was no flop in the French New Wave. Eric Romer never had a flop.
Yeah, and there was also no flop in like a grunge, you know. The only flop that was available then was if you were caught trying to be minor. You know, if you were caught trying to be like for the connoisseur, you know, authentic. Whereas now, yeah, like but also like Drake suing Universal is really so embarrassing. Like it's kind of embarrassing. I feel bad that he's doing it because
you personally feel bad.
Well, I think he should just
it.
because I think Drake has a lot going for him. He doesn't need this.
He's a nice boy.
Like he's
nice
like
boy.
an extremely popular and talented man. Like he doesn't need to prove that Kendrick by seemingly nefarious means has won this battle. You know, just let it go and start fresh and like sort of like restructure the conversation.
Aubrey, are you listening?
Yeah. I mean,
Dude,
I was
this
gonna
is
say,
the
if you're-
best advice you're ever going to get.
That's exactly what I was going to say too. Yeah, I do think that you're getting at something big, which is to go back to your question, Naomi. The flop is certainly, I agree with you, Vincent. Like the flop has always been with us because people have always tried to do and make things and to be things, and they have not always met with success. And wherever other humans are watching, your humiliation potentially lies. But, you know, another thing we had talked about, and I'm sure we'll come back to it in the future, but we had sort of started to throw this around for a year-end episode idea, was Year of the Fan. Fandom and the way that fandom works, and I think this is what you're getting at, Vincent, I do think is really key to how we perceive these flops now, because we are in an era when, we're being appealed to on ever more niche levels. And the idea is how to really kind of fuse the art taker-inner's identity with the art maker or with the politician. One thing that I found disturbing, to come back to the Kamala Harris example, was the ways that fandom overlapped with politics. And there was, of course, politicians hope for that. And Trump certainly has it. He figured out how to crack that code. But if you're not going to become a fan, there's still a lot of more people who need to be won over in the political game. And it just seemed increasingly that the fandom strategy was going to let us all down.
Yeah.
So I do think that has to do with the flop. And, fandom also, like one question of fandom is, so do you stand by your guy when they're flopping hard? Like, you saying there's no flops in the French New Wave. I was thinking about not the New Wave, but I was thinking someone who's, about to insert himself right back into the culture cycle again, Bob Dylan. If you're a Dylan fan, or at any point, if you've been one, it is to live through periods of just bafflement. Like, what are you doing? Why is the Christmas album happening? Like, why is Bob Dylan singing Christmas carols? And
he was saved.
Yeah, well, I mean, no. He was saved, he was lost, and then the Christmas carols happened. Like, I think it was, 2008. It was just a confusing moment for it to go down. Why are you in a Victoria's Secret ad, Bob? We want to know. But I think, you kind of hitch your wagon to a star a little bit.
Because I like the product.
Exactly. I think in that case, to be a fan is to kind of go along for the ride and to say, all right, whatever, I didn't like it. In fact, maybe I even hated it, but that's part of the experience. Someone like Katy Perry, who's doing this in a very commercial way, and this is not to seem so like commercial art is not art. No.
Right.
But I think what was so notable and embarrassing about that flop was this feeling of you're trying to tailor yourself to a market that has been, like, the people who told you about this market have not been honest with you. They're not being straight with you. You didn't try to sense it for yourself. You just kind of listened to the presentation, and it didn't go right.
Right.
And it's one of the hallmarks of fandom is the way that the success or failure of the artist and the art then becomes like imprinted onto the identity of the fan. Like, you too have lost, or you too have been. I mean, this is to me part of the Trump phenomenon. It's like that I have been humiliated, and then this causes the resentment that causes me to act in this way. I wrote this year about a documentary or whatever it was by the Daily Wire, the conservative outlet, run by Ben Shapiro, and it's this thing called "Am I Racist?" And
Matt
it's about,
Walsh, right?
Matt Walsh, yeah, and it's about DEI seminars. By the way, the answer to the question posed in the title is like probably yes, I don't know, but like I think so. But
I hope so.
Yeah, but this movie did really well, even though it was just me and like two guys in Kips Bay. But apparently, it did really well. And but after I wrote this piece, all of like the whole thing, all the literally hundreds of messages I got on Twitter were about like, why doesn't the mainstream media review this? Even though it had been a success,
Right.
The lack of prestige, the lack of anything that can be colored as a humiliation becomes a thing shared between artist and fan.
Totally.
And it becomes like this weird fuel.
Yeah, it's like currency. It's fodder for the feeling of rejection, then carries its own kind of momentum. Okay, guys, so the flop. We've been talking about how the flop is humiliating. The flop is bad. The flop is a bad thing. Mm-hmm. Can the flop be a good thing? I'm gonna twist. Can the flop be a good thing?
Yes.
Are there surprising upsides to the flop? Possibly. Like,
Yes.
can it open up room for productivity?
Yes. So I think the flop can be good. I really do think this. And it's in the same way that when you brutally embarrass yourself at a young and formative age, you know, I don't really want to share what's in my head right now, but it was bad. And you have to decide, like, well, do I keep on living or is this the end of the road for me? You know, I made it to 2 weeks into 7th grade and I'm just going to call it a wrap. Like, you know, I think you have to just say, on we go. And that takes confidence and courage for sure. And, you know, what I at least think could be possible and what I want to be possible is flexibility coming out of the flop. Like, what I think is bad is a doubling down and a sense of, I mean, not always bad. Maybe it's okay, you know, like
It's really understandable.
well, like Kevin Costner, who made his also big flop movie about the American West, it's part 1 of 4. Like, I guess he's just going to keep going now. And, you know, maybe by the end of them, people will have come around. That movie didn't.
Horizon?
Yeah, Horizon, is that it? Horizon? Yeah.
It's
yeah. Alex Parrish
a
is like,
Western,
yep.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a Western, and
We'll do our episode about that after part 4.
Exactly. It's part 1 of 4, and it's just he's committed, and like he has to keep, you know, the wagon's got to keep going, so he has to keep, you know, giddy-upping on West and remain
Donner
stuck in
party.
his ways.
Yeah.
But I do think a good thing that could come out of the flop needs to be a flexibility and a sense of. So I think on the one hand, like freedom, I did that. I survived it. I got through it. Mm-hmm. You know, like I think in some ways, always succeeding for an artist is a problem and can really be a problem.
Okay, I like that.
Yeah.
Because I think you retain fear. I think you retain fear of what would happen if you weren't to succeed. Mm-hmm. And this is, you know, when you hear actors talk about failing or talk about not getting cast or, you know, directors who couldn't get their movies made or writers who couldn't get their books published, I do think a very important thing in the making of art is resilience. And it just really distinguishes people who survive from people who don't. Yeah. The ability to keep going. Yeah. So while I don't wish flops on anyone, and certainly not continued flops, if you can get through it, I think there really can be something on the other side.
Right. I mean, I do think there are famous, like, near flops or would-be flops that ended up, I mean, if we're talking about Coppola, you know, the Apocalypse Now, famously, a movie that was kind of like expected, was on its merry way to being an enormous flop, you know, like way over budget, like Coppola like losing his mind in the jungle, you know, like the storms, like hurricanes in the Philippines, you know, just like the whole cast, like Marty Sheen, like getting like a heart attack and crawling down, you know, the side of the road and having to take off from the movie, like at like 36 or something, you know, like, yeah, just like,
it's like actual hell.
Yeah, like actual hell. And yet, he persisted, and it ended up being, one of the greatest works of art of the 20th century. So it's like, obviously it ended up not being a flop, but it could very well have been, and there were like all the signs pointed towards flopdom. Okay, so it's like you're not gonna risk it. You're not gonna try to make what your vision tells you to make. No.
Yeah.
And then I also just want to say, like, on the corollary, I do hope that some of the big studios or the big culture makers who are sitting there, whose job it is just to count their dollars, like the opposite of the I sold my vineyard people, like, do take note of the flops. Like, Madam Web was not something that was enjoyed by most people who encountered it. And, that's a sign. That's a sign.
Yeah.
But as you mentioned before, Alex, I mean, one of the byproducts of this propensity to make protagonists out of figures inside and outside of art is that effect lasts after the outcome. That we like to watch people claw their way back up to that state to try again. That this is like, at least, I mean, I'm sure this is a universal thing, but it certainly seems to me to be like fundamental to the American character, that we're like, well, attaboy, get back on and all of our, one of my favorite things in any American novel is like isn't Gatsby one of the biggest floppers ever, right? All that reaching, and then, but Nick Carraway finds, or is brought that notebook of Gatsby's that he kept as a young man of like, I'm going to work out this much. I'm going to read this much. I'm going to leave time every day to, for self-improvement. And the sheer trying of it makes Nick like Gatsby more than even he ever did in life, right? Like that like the questing spirit that exposes us to the flop. Like maybe the flopper is the person that is like most willing to be vulnerable in front of others. It on some level, it can't help but be endearing and to sort of engender some kind of sympathy.
I love that.
I mean, yeah, we all have to read a lot of press releases. And one thing that occurs to me is how creatives of all kinds these days are required to pitch themselves in these like increasingly grandiose ways all the time. All of us get just like email after email about how this is like, this novel is going to not only entertain you, but solve world hunger. So do you guys feel like today's culture of constant self-promotion has made us all into a bunch of mini Katy Perrys?
It is true now that like the art of the pitch has reached kind of a fever pitch, let's say. But I do think it's in general a kind of like quite American thing to say like, this is it. You have never seen anything like it. Like this is not, it's like you're supposed to talk yourself up when you bring a product to market. It's like you're almost setting yourself up for a flop. When you're kind of selling too hard.
And kind of like we were saying with fans, like part of that is as the artist grafting the artwork totally onto your personality, such that like its fate is your fate too, which is like too much for anything to bear, right?
I guess I feel a little contrary, and I'm like, no, I don't think so. Because, yes, in some cases. I mean, certainly, I think the more corporate you get, the more you're trying to get, I don't mean you, the artist, I mean like the artwork, if it's a TV show, whatever, the more they're trying to go after a certain audience to justify money spent. Not to say literature is so great, woohoo, but if you're sitting down every day to write a novel, like the press release is so far away from where you're at, you better just believe in what you're doing. Because, and we do see trends, of course, and you do see trends that people get really tired of. So trend chasing can be profitable and also can be a disaster. But I don't know if I think that it has totally made people more flop prone for that reason, because you still have to make the work, and that's so hard. You better like it. Like Vinson once said, reading the credits of the show is like, if you've listened this far and like, or if you love our show, and if you've listened this far, I hope you love our show, because life's too short to be spending time on something you don't love. And that's what I feel about the making of art too. Like, you better like doing it.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I have one last question for my co-hosts. Do you have cherished flops? Like films or books or, music that have been widely considered disastrous that you happen to love?
My biggest flop, another way to express flop is what if? The counterfactual urge. It's still, to me, yes, they did really well. They won lots of Grammys. People still listen to their music. But to me, the biggest flop is why in the world did we never get another album from the Fugees? It is something. It is something that haunts my dreams.
Yeah. It's true. And it was so good when it came out. The promise was enormous.
It was the extent to which I was ready to meld my personality with the personality of Wyclef Jean was ridiculous.
Not crass.
And it was one of my early tutorials in being disappointed by someone that you're never going to meet. Living for art is in some ways like trying to projecting things into the future. Like, how great is this going to be the next time? And sometimes the next time never comes.
Oh, that's such a good one.
I know, that's a really good example.
As soon as you said it, I just felt the pain all over again. Well, okay, I thought of an example. It's not something that I fear has gone under-recognized, but a famous flop that I like to think about sometimes for a variety of reasons is a small novel called Moby Dick, which...
A slim volume.
About a whale and some other people. And when it was published, Herman Melville it was a disaster. It was a disaster for him. It sold very few copies. And I really think he was considered insane. And honestly, one cool thing I think about Herman Melville is if you read that book now, you do think he's insane. Like, it's completely unhinged on every single level.
Did you know you can turn them into candles?
Yeah, it's like, what? Whoa. Like, oh my God, more uses for the spermaceti. Like, please, publish it like as a Substack. But no. Yeah, it was a novel that was a huge swing and was considered just an enormous flop and wasn't in the end.
Right.
In the short term, yes. In the long term, quite the opposite.
Yeah.
What about
How about you, Naomi?
Oh my God. I mean, there's a bunch of... I would say, again, I don't know. It depends what you mean by flop. But there are some... reality shows that only had one season that I personally loved so much. Does anyone remember NYC Prep? I see some nods from the audience. PC from NYC Prep. Do you remember?
You're getting too specific for me, sadly.
Oh, it was just a bunch of spoiled private school kids in New York, just tooling around the city. Sebastian. Anyway, whatever. And there was Long Island Princesses, and we could have had it all, and yet it got canceled after one season. Yeah, it's no Moby Dick. Well,
if any of you princesses are listening or former NYC prep, please write into the mail at newyorker.com.
Yes,
we want to know how you're doing
with critics in the subject line.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, you guys, this is it for our live taping. Thank you so much
for
coming.
Thank you, everyone.